way, we were saying that when I was here, there were only like 30 Chinese kids. There's like a handful of families. And now there are 400 at that school. And then all of us being here tonight at this restaurant, there's so much warmth and camaraderie, and it's like the best of this campaign where running for president, you end up meeting a lot of people, you end up making a lot of new friends. But this campaign has attracted the very best people I've ever met. And you all are very much cut from that cloth, so thank you all for being here. So to give a little bit of a sense about me and running for president, like when you first found out about this Chinese American man who's running for president, you thought like, wow, that's new, it's interesting, like, you know, what sort of prospects does he have? And then you, hopefully after you spend some time with me in the campaign, you realize that I'm actually very reasonable, like not crazy, and just trying to solve some of the biggest problems of this time. So unfortunately, the problems that are built up in this country are just getting more and more extreme. And the manifestation of it to me was Donald Trump's victory in 2016. I know some of you, not active politically, some of you might have supported Donald Trump, some of you don't like him. But to me, his election was a sign of just how bad things were getting in many parts of the country, that there was a real desperation for some kind of change up from what our current government systems. That many Americans had lost faith and confidence in their government and were willing to take a chance on Donald Trump because they just wanted someone new and radical from outside the system. Now, I'll give you just a very quick sense of what I've done. So I went to Phillips Exeter, then I went to Brown, and then I went to Columbia Law School and was a corporate lawyer for 5 unhappy months. Sorry if any lawyers in this room. Any lawyers? Doesn't seem like it. Well, whatever. So I was an unhappy corporate attorney for 5 months, and then I quit to start a .com business. That did not work out. It had its mini rise and maximum fall. And then I worked at a healthcare software company for 4 years. And then I became the head of an education company that grew to become #1 in the United States and was acquired by a public company in 2009. So at that point, I started an organization called Venture for America because I had this sinking feeling that America's talent was getting concentrated in Wall Street and Silicon Valley, and not enough of it was heading across the country to places like Schenectady or Rochester or Detroit or Cincinnati or Baltimore or Cleveland. And so I started Venture for America. I donated $120,000 of my own money, and then started calling rich friends asking, do you love America? And then some of them were unwise enough to say yes. They said yes. They joined my board, donated $10,000. Our budget that first year was about $250,000. This year, Venture for America's budget's between $6 and $7 million. Thousands of applicants, hundreds of graduates. We've helped create several thousand jobs around the country. So during that time, I was appointed by the Obama administration as a presidential ambassador of global entrepreneurship. I got to introduce my wife to the president, so that was fun. I got to go to the White House. You could bring one person with you. And I was the only person who brought my significant other. It was the most confusing thing. Everyone was like, here's my comms person, here's my chief of staff. And I was like, here's my wife. Well, the rest of you guys are going to stay married. And then my in-laws liked me a lot more for like a week. So I had this arc with Venture for America where a movie was made about us. It's now on Netflix. If you want to watch it with your kids, it's generally kid-friendly. It's called Generation Startup. It's about young entrepreneurs trying to start businesses in Detroit. So I have an IMDb credit as myself. I wrote a book, received these awards, and then over the 7 years I was traveling the Midwest and the South, I was staggered by how beleaguered most of the country feels. And I don't know if you've traveled to some of these places recently, but they are not thriving at all. And then Donald Trump becomes president, and then I think, wow, like the problems have grown to this point, and they're about to unfortunately get a lot worse because of technology, artificial intelligence, software, and robotics. So this is going to be interesting because we all, frankly, are not normal Americans by most standards. So only 32% of Americans graduate from college, to give you a sense. So 68% are high school graduates or have 1 year of college. So I'm going to ask you all just to volunteer. What do you all think the most common jobs in the United States are, by category? Like, what do Americans actually do for a living? So someone said truck driver, and that's right. Number 4 is truck driving. It's the most common job in 29 states. Yeah?
Administration?
Yeah, administration and clerical work, which includes call center workers. That's number 1. So number 1 is administrative and clerical. Number 4 is truck driving. What are 2 and 3?
Sales clerk.
Sales clerk is number 2. That's retail and sales. 1 in 10 American workers works in retail. The average retail worker is a 39-year-old woman with a high school degree making between $11 to $12 an hour. What's number 3? I'll give you a hint. We're sort of standing in it, or sitting in it. Food service and food preparation is number 3. That includes the hundreds of thousands of fast food workers. Number 4 is truck driving and transportation, and number 5 is manufacturing. So I'm just going to go through that really quickly, because I can sense it's a very smart group. Administrative and clerical, retail and sales, food service and food prep, truck driving and transportation, and manufacturing. What percentage of Americans do you think work in one of those 5 categories? It's half, it's 49%. The average person in these categories is a high school grad making between $14 and $15 an hour. So if you look at these 5 job categories, you know they're going to shrink a ton. Like, how many of you saw the recent AI demonstration that Google put out where they can make appointments for you and essentially like work as your customer service, like a bunch of you? There are 2.5 million Americans still working as call center workers making $14 an hour. How long do you think it's going to be before AI can do that job?
2 years?
2 years, 10 years, somewhere between 2 and 10 years. Probably closer to 2, honestly, because that's like a fairly process-oriented job. 30% of American malls are going to close in the next 4 years because Amazon is sucking up another $20 billion in commerce every year, and just now it's tipping malls into oblivion. Same is true of Main Street stores. You might have seen some retail stores closing even here where you live, though this is a relatively prosperous area. So again, if that's the second most common job in the economy, what are all of the mall workers and retail workers going to do after the stores close? Food service and food prep. You've probably seen the self-serve kiosks in McDonald's. I used to love McDonald's as a kid. My parents fed me so much McDonald's and Chinese food. Those are like the 2 things. So if you feed your kids those things, they could be president. Don't worry about it. Don't get caught up in any of this like kid nutrition stuff. Give them whatever. But McDonald's has already said they're going to have self-serve kiosks in every location in the United States by the next 3 years. So you can see that labor force shrinking. Truck driving is the one that freaks me out the most because there are 3.5 million truck drivers in this country. It's the most common job in 29 states. The average truck driver is, 94% of truckers are male. Average age is 49. Average education is high school. So the stereotype you have of a truck driver, that's actually a truck driver. There is no other truck driver. It's a bunch of high school graduate men. And so if you see on the other side of the country, and many of you probably, how many of you all work in technology? Some of you, for sure. My friends, literally my friends in Silicon Valley are working on self-driving trucks. And they say they're 5 to 10 years away. So what are these 3.5 million truckers going to do when the trucks start driving themselves? This is like Trump to the 10th power. You think that Americans are mad now that we got rid of 4 million of their manufacturing jobs. When you start sending hundreds of thousands of truckers home, it's going to be violence, chaos, riots, and madness. I mean, a lot of these truckers are armed. There are 300 million firearms in this country, 1 for every man, woman, and child, essentially. And I'm going to go on a limb and say that's not us. It's not the people in this room don't own like a gun per person. So these are the trends that are coming up. And this is what I was seeing. I was staring at 2017, was like, oh my gosh, this country is heading towards a disastrous future unless we wake Americans up to the fact that it's not immigrants, it's technology that is getting rid of most of these jobs that Americans rely on. So I went to Washington, D.C. And talked to various leaders and said, look guys, we're in the 3rd inning of the greatest economic and technological transformation in the history of the world. The 3rd inning has brought us Donald Trump. What is the plan to help America get to the 4th and 5th inning successfully and not end up with this very, very, very disastrous situation? And what do you all think senior officials in Washington, D.C. said to me when I presented them with this question? They said, I don't know. Pretty much, that's what they could have said. So the 3 responses I got were, 1, we cannot talk about that. 2, we should study that further. And 3, we must educate and retrain Americans for the jobs of the future. Now the 3rd sounds relatively competent, right? It's like, oh yeah, we should educate and retrain Americans for the jobs of the future. But then I said, look guys, I looked at the independent studies and how effective federally funded retraining programs are. Do you all want to guess how effective they are on a percentage basis? 10? 30? The range is 0 to 15%. Because it turns out retraining people is very, very hard. And oftentimes there's not a job waiting for them on the other side. And you're talking about people who might have worked in a manufacturing facility for a number of years, they have health problems, they haven't been to school in a long time. And so if you're an employer, are you going to hire that 50-year-old former manufacturing worker, or are you going to hire some 25-year-old community college graduate who probably wants less money? You know, so the reality is that our retraining is more of a fantasy than a real solution. And so then when I said, hey guys, I looked at the independent studies, it turns out we're terrible at that. Then they say, well, that's my talking point, so I don't know what to tell you. Like, I guess we're going to get better at it. And I was like, yes, we're probably not going to get better at it. This meeting's terrible. So these are the responses I was getting from senior officials in Washington, D.C. And I had this sinking feeling coming back on the train from D.C. I was like, are we really that far gone as a society that our politicians can't even address the elephant in the room that's tearing these communities apart? And the answer is yes, we are that far gone. Our politicians are completely out to lunch. They do not understand technology at all, and they barely understand the economy. And so then when you're faced with this set of truths, you say, okay, how would we actually try and solve for this set of problems? Like, how can you wake Americans up? And I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've created a multi-million-dollar organization out of just an idea I had. You know, I've sold a company to a public company. So I said, you know what? We can take this case to the American people. We can create a wave, and because most Americans are pretty smart. Like if you say, hey, you know what the problem is? The problem is we're about to automate away truck driving. Like 30% of your Main Street stores are about to close. We need to actually evolve as a people and an economy and a society. We have to start valuing ourselves in a way different than the market. Because the market will not care about cashiers and truckers and accountants and radiologists over time when AI can do those jobs. And so we need to start valuing ourselves intrinsically. So that is what I decided to run for president, is to make that case to the American people and solve these problems. And the big ways to solve the problems, one of you probably heard of is I want to give every American adult $1,000 a month, which would go so far to solve these problems, it is insane. Where right now, 57% of Americans can't pay an unexpected $500 bill. How many of you would agree with the sense that America is getting less reasonable and even less intelligent, like in this last several years? Anyone have that sense? Yeah. So if you look at the studies, you find that not being able to pay your bills decreases your functional intelligence by 13 IQ points, or almost one standard deviation. That's a ton. I mean, one standard deviation. So what we're doing is we're tipping more and more Americans into financial insecurity. They're not able to pay their bills, and then they get less reasonable, more impulsive, more susceptible to bad ideas. And if you go to them at that point and you say, hey, you don't need to worry about climate change, they say, like, I don't care about the penguins, like, get off my lawn, or whatever the heck it is. You know, like, that's where most Americans are. So you need to reverse that, bring $1,000 a month into their hands, and then their heads will come up, they will see that their future is assured, and then we can start solving some real problems. They can also start making more meaningful adjustments in terms of what the economy holds. The other big thing we need to do that's, I think you'll like this, because you're all sophisticated, I sense, is that we need to start measuring economic value in different ways than GDP, which is a measurement that we made up almost 100 years ago during the Great Depression when things were going very, very badly. And even the inventor of GDP said this is a terrible measurement for national well-being and we should not use it as that. He also said we should include parenthood and motherhood in the calculation because it's so valuable. So one of the examples I use on the trail is I say, look, my wife is at home with our two young boys, 6 and 3, one of whom is on the autism spectrum. What does GDP value her work at? 0. What does the market value her work at? 0. But we know the work she's doing is some of the most important work there is, that it's more valuable, harder, contributing more to society than a hedge fund analyst or like a corporate lawyer. And so we need to start evolving our measurements, and also putting $1,000 into the hands of every adult would help balance the scales, and it would help compensate and reward women for the uncompensated, unrecognized work that women do every day in our society. So those are some of the big moves we need to make, and that is the plan to help America get through this incredible transition that we're in. Now, most politicians don't want to touch this because it seems really big and expensive and alarmist. But if you look at the numbers, we are here. Like, all of the negative signs you'd want to see are already here with us. 8 Americans are dying of drugs every hour. Our life expectancy has declined for the last 3 years, unheard of in a developed country, because of a surge in suicides among middle-aged Americans and drug deaths. Our labor force participation rate is at 63%, which is the same levels as El Salvador and the Dominican Republic, and 1 in 5 prime working age American men has not worked in the last year. There's like an army of men that are out of the workforce. All of the negative things you would expect to see happening if we were in the early stages of this displacement of labor, particularly unskilled male labor, they're right here. Like this is it. This is time. Donald Trump is the sign, and we need to grow up and evolve as a society as fast as possible. So that's why I'm running for president. I'm not running for president necessarily to be the first Asian American man to run for president as a Democrat, though I'm very, very proud of that. But I will say that my perspective on this is very much wedded to who I am as a person. Because my perspective, I'm going to suggest, is that of an Asian American entrepreneur who understands technology, understands the numbers, understands the impact it's having on communities, and most of our politicians are nowhere near that stuff. Some of the leading politicians, no offense to anyone in this room, but they were born in the 1940s, and thus don't understand some of the things that are happening on the ground in Silicon Valley. So, my campaign, I just want to give a shout out to Zach, my campaign manager, who's recording me right now. Just want to give him a round of applause. So Zach saw many of the same things I saw. He left a high-paying Wall Street job to come be the campaign manager for Andrew Yang for president. To give you a sense of how that. He graduated from Duke University, has been working on Wall Street for a number of years, and then he saw the same things I saw, which is that the country is coming apart, and that no one's willing to talk about the real issues or problems. So the campaign, I'm glad to say, has been growing by leaps and bounds every single day, thanks to everyone, thanks to people like you here in this room. We raised almost $1 million to date. I was interviewed by Time Magazine. Freakonomics will both be coming out this month. CNN just included me in its last poll in Iowa, and I was the top choice of 1% of I was one of the top 2 choices of 1% of Iowans, which may or may not sound like a lot, but we were jumping for joy, because I'll tell you, if you think about what that means, that a significant number of Iowans said that guy should be president, like as a startup entrepreneur, I know that as soon as you have product market fit, you can grow from there. And so we were celebrating, one, that we were included in CNN's first national poll, and 2, that 1% of Iowans said Andrew Yang should be president, at the same levels as Kirsten Gillibrand and Eric Holder, who've been national politicians for quite some time. So that is the why. The what, and this is what we're so grateful to you all in terms of contributing your time and resources and hopefully your enthusiasm, is that we have a genuine chance to change the course of history here for Asian Americans, for the country, over this next period. So one thing I said to the group at the junior high earlier, America is projected to become majority minority in 2045. It's 27 years from now. It's really fast, actually. Like, your kids are going to be adults and parents in a country that is majority non-white. Now, if you look at world history, unfortunately, when a population becomes more diverse, racism tends to go up, not down. Like, during this last period of Obama's presidency, there was this very positive